Welcome to Footprints of Pacifica. I'm Sharon Walker, and I'm a member of the Pacifica Historical Society, and I am hosting this show for our viewers today, and for Mary Harris. Mary Harris is our guest today. This is the second show that we have done with you, Mary, and this is going to be on you and your life in Shelter Cove and your insight into that very unique area. So welcome to Footprints of Pacifica.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here.
Well, so happy to have you here too, and have the opportunity of interviewing you. And we joined you at your home in Shelter Cove along Bob Twigg, our director, and Steve Brown, our editor and videographer, joined me, and we had the great chance of being down there with you. And I'd like to comment that I feel that Shelter Cove is a very unique place. It has a mystique about it. I think a lot of Pacificans, because it is inaccessible, it's privately owned, so they don't really know a lot about Shelter Cove. And Mary, I would like to know give us your description as to what Shelter Cove is and what it is to Pacifica.
Well, Shelter Cove is such a beautiful place. Its natural beauty is so wonderful to be around day in and day out. And I think most of the people who live down there feel that way about it too. And people who see it from above, which is about the only way you can see it so much now.
How do you feel the people who don't live in Shelter Cove, how do you feel that they view Shelter Cove?
Well, some people, in different ways, of course, but some people are envious of it, and other people are annoyed by the fact that we have people now who have cars have to park up there, up at the top of the hill. But all in all, the neighbors, the people around us in Pedro Point have been really helpful and wonderful for the most part. You know, it hasn't been a problem for people.
Well, let's take a look at the tape and learn more about Shelter Cove, your stories, and your insight into that very unique and special part of Pacifica. Mary, we're in this incredible place of Shelter Cove. What originally brought you to Pacifica, and then how did you end up in Shelter Cove?
I've heard about Shelter Cove from some of my friends who are at San Francisco State, and they'd come down here for picnics, and I thought, well, we want to find that place. So we went up to where you came down the stairs, you know, came down to that part, and looking all over for it, and finally found the road that came down to Shelter Cove. There was a road then. And it happened that we knocked on the door that said manager, and it happened they had a vacancy. And I was really interested in that, and so that's how and then I said, yes, I like that. And it was number 11, it wasn't this house then.
So that was a different
That was in
house.
1957.
And then how long did you teach in Pacifica, and what did you teach in?
I taught elementary school, I taught kindergarten. I started teaching kindergarten in Pacifica. I had been teaching first and second grade combination in Hanford, and here I taught kindergarten. And I taught in 2 schools. I taught in Sharp Park School and Valamar the first of those years. And then I think I taught in Sanchez in '58 when they opened, just for a few months I taught there, or maybe '60, because then I went overseas and taught in 1960.
In 1960 you went overseas. So your total teaching career was how many years outside of the United States?
It was 6 years.
6 years, that's
Yeah,
a long
6
time.
years.
What made you decide to come back, and how did you...
Well, I decided when my money gets down to an airline fare, I better get home.
Good thinking there.
Yeah. When I got home from Europe, I stayed with a friend in Lafayette for a while, and then I found an apartment in the city and was there, and I got a call. Oh, this is kind of a funny story. My mother, it's sort of funny. My mother, I went to her funeral in 1970, and the winter of 1970, and I got a call. When I got home from that funeral, I got a call from the manager of Shelter Cove saying there was an apartment. I had put my name on the list as soon as I got back, you know, and there was an apartment. Would I like to come and see it? And that was this house. And I did come and see it, and I really liked it. But as soon as I got that call, after I hung up, I thought, she worked really fast. My mother loved Shelter Cove. She had been here once, you know, and saw it. And I thought, she really worked fast, you know, to get me a place at Shelter Cove. But
So then you moved in and you've been living here ever
since
since.
70, 40 years, that is.
That's a long time. What about the history here of Shelter Cove? You've lived here a long time, and I'm certain you have have an interesting perspective on the history. Could you share that?
Well, I understand that level where you came down to the steps, that level,
Stairs are there?
that was the old railway that went from San Francisco. It was supposed to go all the way to Santa Cruz. I think it stopped a little short of Santa Cruz. You can see the old road out here, and the old railroad. And apparently they had rum runners bringing rum into Shelter Cove, and apparently there was prostitution in Shelter Cove many, many years ago. And when I interviewed for a job down here and talked to the superintendent and told him I lived in Shelter Cove, his eyebrows raised. He must have thought it was still like that, but it wasn't. It isn't, you know, family. It's a family place.
And so how many people are living here now, Mary?
Well, around 30. I don't know the exact number, but I have a big list of them.
And any of those who have been living here as long as you?
No.
Okay, so
No, I'm the ancient. I tell people I'm the ancient down here.
And how many actual buildings are there here?
There are 18, but a number of them are duplexes.
I see.
So, yeah.
And I noticed today that there's some surfing going on out here.
A lot of my neighbors surf.
Now, people from outside this little community are not allowed to come down into this area, are they? Or
No, they aren't. They have to, if they want to go fishing, they have to go all the way around the end of that north point out there. And then they can, because from the tide line, the high tide line, I think it is, it belongs to the people of California.
yes. And the road itself that used to come in here, that was washed out a number of years ago, right?
Well, that was washed out in '82.
I remember that.
So I had 12 years of driving to my house, you know, and we'd have our American Federation of Teachers parties down here on Friday nights occasionally,
Good place.
you know, and people could drive and park right out here on the beach.
Well, and how many stairs come down now? How many stairs?
There are 160 because I counted them.
And you're still going up and down those stairs at least probably once a day. That's
Not once a day, no. I take days off so I can have some rest.
And Mary, who actually owns Shelter Cove?
His name is Arno Roloff, and he's been here since 1996.
Oh, since 1996. And who owned the property before that?
Before that was Tellegen, Jim Tellegen,
And
and he and Linda owned it, and then he was killed in Montana, or he died. I mean, I think he had a heart attack and was frozen in Montana. And then Arno bought it, and before that was Charles Pavka. When I first moved in, it was Charles Pavka. The place where they had you could buy stuff and pay your parking fee was right this little corner place, right down at the corner of the big house next door.
And what year was that, probably?
Well, that was open during '57 to '60 when I was here the first time, and also there was a wonderful restaurant with a gorgeous stained glass window at the back of the bar, and excellent food down here at that time. When I came back in '70, it was no longer there.
How much did it cost to park at that particular
I don't know. I didn't have to park. I could park in my garage, so I didn't have to pay parking. But prices were real low in those days, yes.
So have you seen different aspects of how the property's been managed during that time?
Yes, I have. I think Arno's done a lot for the area, the property, and he's made a lot of good changes. And and Charles Pavka did a wonderful job too. He was good. He would clean up everything. He'd get us to help him clean up the mess after the big storms, you know.
Can you historically remember any major storms that impacted your life here? I'm certain there's been a few.
In '58 and '60, each year there was an earthquake, one in Peru and one in Alaska, and we had tidal waves. I was in number 11 then, and I got a knock on the door, and the police said you have to get out within an hour. And I had to call somebody up at the top of the hill and call my friend. She said, call so-and-so, a friend of hers at the top of the hill. And I packed the bag and went up to the top of the hill.
What did you take? I think that's always a question.
Well, just some extra clothes and, you know, things that I needed.
And do you now kind of think in terms of that? If you have a lot of stuff here.
I know. I'd probably want to take some photographs and clothes, you know, extra clothes.
Speaking of photographs, I know you have a couple of albums there that we had talked about earlier. Could you comment on some of those?
These two are about Shelter Cove, these two books. And the small book goes from 57 to 60. 57 to, not 57 to 60, and then 57 to 60, and then 70 to now. Yeah. These pictures show the way the Cove was, and the Cove Road was before the big tidal wave. This little house was right next to number 11 where I lived, and it's totally gone now. And this was a picture looking out of that window. There used to be an anchor sitting up on the road before you came down the little hill toward this house. And you could see that anchor, and there was also a big sign that said Shelter Cove on the road. Another was an arrow pointing to Shelter Cove, okay? This is one of my neighbors. This showed this old swing set, which we don't have much left of, and we had 15 barbecue pits and tables and benches to go with them, and they're all gone. This is, you take a long walk out to the point, the southern point, and see this wonderful cliff area, and the view of the rocks and the area when you take that long walk out to the southern point. And these are, that one is I'm playing my guitar, amateur, and Christmas holidays at the Cove, and friends visiting. These pictures are damages from the 1960 tidal wave. This house was really badly damaged, and you can see more damage. Here's one with just a chimney left, and Then again, that house next door, in bad shape. And here's the fire. They're burning the one of the houses at the very end of the cove, the southern end of the cove. And these are just pictures of visitors.
And what about any other recent storms that you can think of, or other challenges that you've had living down here?
Well, the one in '82, which took our road, was a big challenge because we had to use the path for all those years. And then the path would go out occasionally, and then the owner would fix the path so that we could walk on it again.
And when did the path, because that path is now not accessible, right? And when did that become inaccessible?
That went out 2 years ago, I think it was. 2 or 3 years ago, maybe.
Well, the ocean stuff doesn't stop, does it, Mary?
No, it keeps eating away at the cliff, you know. Gets hungry, I suppose.
How, by living here, how has this environment of Shelter Cove, which is so amazing, and the ocean, how has it affected your art and your creativity?
Well, I have compositions every time I look out the window, a new one, you know. The sunset paintings I've made, I've sold all of them. Anytime I paint a sunset, I think, well, if I were painting just for money, I would just paint all these sunsets that I make. But I just like to paint what I want to paint and what comes to my head to paint, or just as I said, I love to have a blank canvas and then just fool around with it and find out what I can create out of it.
I'm certain that here you have become quite the environmentalist by living here.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
I try to save water and not turn the gas on and the lights on too much and stuff. And I've never been much of a gardener, I have to admit. My mother and sister were both really good gardeners, and a niece studied horticulture and worked for the San Francisco, the Golden Gate Park. So the nature takes over and does most of my stuff. Somebody had planted amaryllis out there, and every August I have beautiful amaryllis come up. Well, I guess I like it here. I've lived in this house for 40 years, although I've lived a lot of other places, because even when I was young we would move around occasionally, but it's just a perfect place for me. I don't worry about spilling paint on the floor or anything, because you can see my floors are in bad shape, and it's just a place where I can be really comfortable and have beauty and serenity around me all the time, just looking out at I usually have breakfast here, and even though I listen to Democracy Now! On the radio and hear all the terrible things that are going on, I can look right out here at this ocean that goes on. And it's interesting, the ocean, the surf is always coming toward us. No matter where you are in the world, the ocean is coming toward you.
And I think it's such a part of you, Mary.
I just love the ocean. And I talk to it sometimes. Not really, but in my head, I say hi.
What a beautiful piece. And as you said, how lovely it is to live there.
It is a wonderful place.
And the music and the editing was beautifully done by Steve, so I think it kind of just set this special mood right now here in the studio. Mary, I love the fact that you refer to yourself as the Ancient. Now, is that just you, or do others use that name?
No, I just thought of it.
You just thought of it?
Sure.
You just thought of it?
Well, I am the oldest one down there, and have had many years of my life there.
You have. Mm-hmm. And the other folks there, how do they view you?
I have the most wonderful, I shouldn't just say neighbors, friends, you know, neighbors and friends. And I have wonderful friends in Pacifica too, you know, in all parts of Pacifica. And that's why it's not so difficult for me to get my mail, because usually when somebody's bringing me home, we go over and pick up my mail, which is another half mile away or quarter of a mile away. And so it's wonderful to have such dear, loving friends, you know. And I consider my neighbors friends too. They're just wonderful people.
I get the feeling that it's more or less like an extended family there.
It is, yes.
You had mentioned mail, and one of the questions that came to mind, and I think that might be for some of our viewers too, some of the basics, everyday of life, like where do people get their mail? What about your garbage?
Well, they're all located at the beginning of the old road. There is a wide enough space so we can have a garbage, and our mailboxes are there, and recycling boxes are there.
Right.
But it's quite a walk for me.
Yes.
But most of the people can drive over, you know, just make a quick driving trip over to pick up their mail, or pick up, or dump their garbage or recycling.
Okay.
But I often get rides from friends.
And then utilities in Shelter Cove. Shelter Cove has all the Pacifica utilities as well.
Yes.
Because I had kind of wondered about that myself. One of the questions I'd like to ask you too is that wildlife. You must have just a wonderful experience of seeing wildlife there. I don't know, more so than other parts of Pacifica. What are your thoughts?
We have a lot of deer, and we now have a fox, a beautiful red fox down there. And he's very gentle, and he's more like he's domesticated, but he isn't, of course. And I remind my friend who said they stared at each other. She'd sit by the fox and they'd look at each other. I said, just always remember it's a wild animal, you know. And she said, yeah, she's aware of that.
Very good advice. And do you see a lot of birds in the area?
Oh yeah, wonderful pelicans. We see pelicans quite often. The brown pelicans. And seagulls and all kinds of birds.
How about marine mammals?
We see the seals sometimes. I used to see them more often, but we don't see them as often now.
Well, it's just such a natural, beautiful space.
It is.
And I love the story of the red fox. There was one story that I would like to have you just briefly elaborate on that, and that there was a TV reporter, and that was during, I think it was the 1958 evacuation. Could you make some comments on that?
Are you talking about the tidal wave?
Yeah, the tidal wave,
we had to go out. That was 1960, I think.
Yes.
And the press came down, and they wanted me to go back up into my house, you know. And I said, no, I don't have time for that. I've got to get to school. And apparently when I got to school, my principal had seen it on TV.
Oh, really?
They'd showed all that, so that was funny.
Who was your principal at that time?
It was Charlene Hopkins was her name.
I'm certain some of our viewers out there may recognize that.
Yes.
You have seen many changes in Shelter Cove during the 40 years plus as a resident. I think it's been like 43 years. And what do you see as the future of Shelter Cove, Mary?
That's a very difficult Very difficult question because it's hard to, the ocean has its own idea of what it wants, you know, and takes it often. And so it's hard to say what's going to happen in the future to Shelter Cove. But I hope it isn't. I hope it lasts a long time, and that I hope we're able to get in and out of there for a while, you know.
Yes, because it's certainly, the ocean is certainly taking its toll on other parts of Pacifica. Any thoughts on that?
Oh yes, I think
Yeah.
it's drastic, some of the things that are happening at the north end of the city and other parts of the city, the flooding and the cliffs becoming destroyed, so the houses, apartments are falling down, and
Exactly.
it's terrible.
And when we were down at the Cove with you, because you've been there for 40 years, and we're seeing, I've been in Pacific for about 20 years, and seen some major changes at the north end of town. But how much, have you seen parts of the beach or a certain percentage of the beach disappear in your area, or?
It does different things. Like we had quite a good beach a few months ago, and before that, last winter, the rocks there were so many rocks that I couldn't even walk onto the beach.
Wow.
And then they disappear. So they come and go, you know, the rocks, and the beach comes and goes.
Yeah.
But a lot of our beach ends up on what we used to have a road that would go in front of the houses. Well, now it's all sand.
Right.
So,
Well, we're at the end of the show, Mary, for the most part, and for just a closing comment about Shelter Cove to our viewers, so your thoughts about the Cove or your feelings about it?
well, it's a wonderful place to live, and I wish everyone who wanted to live there could. But anyway, that's the way I feel about it. I hope I can live there for some more time.
I'm certain that you will, and thank you so much. This has been such a privilege to interview you on this show and the other show that we did on you and as an artist. So thank you so much for being our guest here at Footprints of Pacifica.
Well, I thank you too.
Oh, you're welcome. If you want to get involved with the Pacifica Historical Society, our address is Box 752, Pacifica 94044, and check out our website, www.pacificahistory.org, and our phone number 359-5462. Thank you so much for watching us, and I would like to close with the words of Frank Winston, as he said in all of his end of his shows. Lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing, leave behind us footprints in the sand of time.